We interrupt this program to bring you the Design Hustle podcast, conversations around successful design journeys. Take it away, Ali.
Thomas Wilson, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ali. Nice to be here.
I am so excited to have you, and this time I want to sort of change things up. I have a typical way of introducing people, but this time I want to read through the description of your LinkedIn, and this I got really intrigued, and this is amazing. Okay, so and you say I'm a manager of madness, storytelling service designer, discovery doer, dedicated design director, curiosity crusader, responsible AI advocate, innovation maven, UX geek, agent of behavioral change, bombast brand advocate, digital transformer, fearless foodie, pioneering pilgrim, pixel pusher, optimization optimist, validated venture designer, wayward wordsmith, and champion of human-centered design. I am blown away with this.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But it's all true. Those are all things that I do and have dedicated my career to. And the second part of that, the second half basically indicates that, every problem has the solution within itself. And that's what I'm looking for, because I want to create supernatural brand loyalty, right? We want to make sure that whoever we're serving, the customers first, and then of course the employees, and then after that the business, right? And I like to put them in that order. One of the things that concerns me the most about a lot of the there's a lot of jargon and a lot of talk in our industry, right? And so one of the things that people love to say lately in the last 5-10 years is, I'm a systems thinker. And, we're doing systems design and systems thinking. Well, cool. Okay. But what does that mean? And usually when you walk that out and you listen to whoever is saying this, they don't really understand systems. And, being that you've done architecture, and being that, you've, experienced different cultures and different things, you're going to understand that most businesses, most relationships, meaning your marriage, your family, everything works on some type of proverbial caste system. You don't want to say this out loud because it's not a nice thing to say, but we are not equal and all on a continuum, and everybody doesn't get their needs met in a system. And pretending like that's your job to make sure everybody's equal and gets their needs met is such BS, because the bottom line is somebody's got to be at the bottom, somebody's got to be in the middle, and somebody's going to be at the top. That's human nature. That's how things work. It's about division of labor. It's about IQ. It's about talent. And, that's where people fall. And if you're telling the truth, I don't know about your relationship, but I have a pretty kick-ass marriage, and my wife's at the top of the caste system.
Absolutely. I think we are trying to agree.
She's the boss.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing, to be honest, because you are in good hands. That means.
Right. So when
Yeah.
we design for systems, you need to know that, sometimes you're the lion and sometimes you're the gazelle. You know what I mean? And that's human nature, and it's okay to say that. But we get caught up in really not understanding how power and influence and socioeconomic concerns and all sorts of things. I mean, I could rattle off 50 things that affect that order of things. But that's what I do all day, is I try to figure out the power and the order and what's really going on. And part of that is that, initial problem definition. And do you want to go into how I came about
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I'll start there. So, I started off really young, being an illustrator and getting into music. Like by the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old, I was singing on stage with my uncle, with people at church gatherings, things like that. Just stuff that kids do. But I was good at it, and you know what I mean. Unnaturally good, and so.
Yeah.
And so people started to take notice of that. I started to write a lot. I started to draw and illustrate. And, by the time I was, somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, everyone around me, like my family, my teachers, people who, interacted with me at school, realized that, my brain worked a certain way and it enabled me to create things. And so I was getting good at music. I was getting good at illustration. I was getting good at, conveying my ideas. And I wasn't so great at at science and mathematics, early on in my career, and like in my schooling. But so from there, I really needed to get away. I grew up very poor, impoverished in a city called Houston, Texas. It's the south. It's close to the ocean, in Texas. It's around the Gulf Coast. And I grew up in that area, and that area is really well known for engineering, oil and gas, petrochemical work, environmental work, stuff like that. And plus, there's a world-class healthcare uh, community there. There's a lot of healthcare, a lot of uh, uh, healthcare workers. There's a bunch going on with regards to research. There's the biggest healthcare systems are there: Tenet, HCA. There's St. Luke's, Memorial Hermann. A lot of really big hospitals. A lot of learning colleges like UTMB, and so growing up in that kind of environment, and my mom kind of working in those environments, I knew what was there, and I knew it probably wasn't for me. I was interested in the healthcare stuff, but not so much when I was a teenager. And I knew that I had to get out of my environment to thrive and to learn. And I wanted to go to college, but like I said, I didn't have a lot of money, and so I ended up going to a really kind of a third or fourth tier school to get started. But I had already designed logos. I had already been designing. I designed the first United Way like brochure. I did a bunch of things like in the '80s. Like I'm kind of old, and so I was doing that stuff and getting recognized, like older people that were in ad agencies and my mother or friends knew were like looking at the stuff I was doing, and I was like 15 doing this stuff, 14, and they were like, yeah, you should probably go to school for this. And so
Question. Sorry, Thomas. I'm just going to jump in to ask you a question. So, were you sort of aware of what you were doing, what design was, what graphic design was, or were you just drawing things out? So, what was the thinking process like at that time?
Yeah, so I had teachers. I had a couple of instructors, like art instrucors, who took an interest in me, and they taught me things, and they would pull me aside and mentor me a little bit more so than other students. And I learned a lot from them. And in fact, the three or four most important role models in my life were artists and art teachers, and one of them was an art teacher and a coach, and the other one was my grandmother. But yeah, the three men in my life that were excellent mentors were all art and advertising and branding and that sort of thing, teachers. And that's where I learned the most from initially, was from them, aside from the stuff that I was just doing and learning on my own. I spent a lot of time in libraries reading books. When I was 14 or 15 years old, I read Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols. And then I started reading like Joseph Campbell books and, The Power of Myth and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was getting into like really understanding the symbolism behind various religions, and understanding like theology. I started reading a lot of books about theology, mostly about Judeo-Christian concepts and Islam, and also about things like Buddhism and things like that. So understanding that, if you understand all of that stuff, that stuff has a lot of imagery, a lot of pageantry, a lot of iconography, semiotics. You know what I mean? There's the cross means something, the Star of David means something, the crescent moon. These symbols have meanings, and so I was getting exposed really young, at a young age to that sort of stuff, and it intrigued me and excited me.
I think the perfect storm was brewing, because you open that small head, you fill it with all sorts of things, and I can imagine like what happened later. So just take us through the journey. So what happened after?
Yeah, and the other really weird thing that I don't tell people a lot about, but really influenced the heck out of me was music. So, music, cinema, reading books. I read a lot. I was a kind of a bit of a book nerd, as a kid. If you look behind me, I mean, you can't see my whole screen, but that is a wall-to-wall bookshelf of all books that I've had my whole life or read, and all of that influenced me. It influenced the design angle, and the idea of creating things and things like that. But the my next stage, after that initial degree, like let's call that like early 90s and my early 20s, is I started working for a retail store that was called it was Burdines and Bloomingdale's, but it got bought out by Macy's, and I got exposed to a lot of interesting stuff there. I was able to be like a junior art director and a production artist, and I went on photo shoots. I helped write everything from taglines to TV spots to radio spots, and I was also doing color correction and scanning things with these giant rotary drum scanners. I mean, and this is old school. Like, I'm dating myself, but it's funny because Jacob Nielsen, he used to work at Unix at Sun Spark, and I was working on a Sun Spark Unix machine, and it was the fastest computer in the world at the time. But the software was called Camex. It was called the Breeze, and it basically enabled you to put together like page makeup and things. It's basically like glorified. Imagine like a Corel Draw. So like it had Quark Express or InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop all wrapped up into one. And so this was a really like a revolutionary um, software and hardware system for that time. And this is back when like hard drives for like you know uh, uh, 2 gigabytes or 5 gigabytes were like the size of refrigerators. I worked in a clean room like that, in a room where like I had a raised floor and it was like 65 degrees in there at all times. You had to wear like a sweater or a jacket. And this is in downtown Miami. This is like, so it's hot outside, but it's freezing cold in the room where I was working. But I learned a lot there, and I got to hang out with the folks that were working in the dark room and the people that did all the scanning, and I just learned a lot, and there was a lot of old timers there, and I was really young, and they liked me, and so they would just teach me stuff, and so I really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot there. I worked a lot of long hours. I learned some of the ins and outs of retail and how retail works and how shady it is and how fun it is. But there's a lot of shady stuff that happens. I was airbrushing and making clothing that didn't exist and putting them in ads so that people would come into the store to buy them. And then they would try it on and be like, I don't think this is the thing that you're advertising. Like, we would lower cut the blouse or the whatever. We would add things and frills to, yeah, and just do it all in like color correction and like image editing. And so I did that, and that was kind of weird because that was shocking to me that was happening. And they're like, yeah, we just want to get them in the store, and they get in the store and they buy other things. And so I later learned that's what happens in auto advertising too, because I contracted. When I came back from Miami, I contracted for a little while doing automobile advertising, and we did everything from direct mail to web, to you name it. But they did those giant ads that used to go in the newspapers that had the laundry list of cars. Do you know what I'm talking about? And all of those cars were fake. None of those cars really existed. And we would put those ads in newspapers, and people would call in and be like, do you have the Corvette for $5,000? And no, that one just magically just got sold, but we have another one. Come on in and let's talk fee. And so I know that was kind of when I started to understand like what marketing and marketing and branding and positioning and advertising is, and all bad, but that's some of the lessons that I learned. And meanwhile, while I was doing all that work, and you know I came back, and I was reading a lot of books, like psychology books, like things about like Eric Erikson and Wilhelm Wundt and Maslow and Skinner and, all these kind of people. And I was really getting into understanding like human factors and psychology and things like that. And so I started designing software and designing a lot more like things for devices and like in schematics and designing things for like pumps and heat exchangers and things for like nuclear power plants and giant pulp and paper manufacturing plants and things like that. I started designing like stuff that you really had to know what you were doing and you had to understand contrast, and there's a lot of different types of things that I was designing that were, they had like OSHA concerns, and like they had to have fail-safe buttons, and they had to have larger touch target sizes, so because if you were wearing gloves in these environments, which a lot of the men in these environments are wearing thick gloves, they need to be able to hit the button to turn things off, you know what I mean? Really fast. And so I learned a lot about, human factors and UI. Back then it was called GUI, graphical user interfaces. And so I started to design a lot of stuff like that. And at the same time, in tandem, I was doing, like print media and brochures and trade show booths and websites and things like that. But I was really gravitating more towards the software stuff, and I really enjoyed that work. Um, After that, I got a short stint, a year at NASA. I started working for one of the largest ad agencies in the world, J. Walter Thompson, and I worked in a very specialized area of J. Walter Thompson, which was called specialized communications, but it's basically employee experience. And so what we did is we did everything from helping with internal communications and training and intranets and things like that. And that was really interesting and fun too. And I got to work on a lot of really large accounts doing that work. From there,
Sorry, question, Thomas. So when you join a company like that, which is like really, I would say, uh, controlled and also like quite confidential and all. So what role would you have then as a designer? So would you just be then doing the layouts, or were you also uh, redesigning the experience part of it?
all of that. And so
Okay.
the team that I was on actually did a lot of the new pitches. We did a lot of new pitches to get accounts, but we also had a few really large accounts for the work that we did. And it was mostly fintech, banking, healthcare. And I had a few clients that were like, like at the time, like Blockbuster and Compaq, and then it turned into HP. But yeah, we were basically doing employee communications and internal design and things that were like, more about training or computer based trainings, like those CBTs, those little classes you have to take, in order to understand policy and things like that and laws. And so I did a lot of that and did a lot of like training videos and things like that. Went to another agency from there, did a lot of work for Kroger. And that was all everything from EX, CX, UX, you name it. Um, yeah, I did.
Exactly. So, just like you're like not halfway through your work experience right now. Now we take a
Right.
break over here, right? And I'm like, I'm just thinking, like that's what I was thinking when I read your thing. I'm like, okay, how are you not confused by this
Oh,
point in time, right? It's like,
not,
who are you? Yeah.
not only was I not confused, but all of this stuff is related. It's interconnected, and if you can see the patterns and the overlap. But I'll tell you what's so funny is you'll really identify with this and understand this probably more than anybody. But when I realized I was probably in my mid 20s when I realized that everything that gets designed or created and put out into the world goes through something like 5 to 10 stage gates, and it goes through a process. And being that you have an architectural background, I mean, you know that like those first stages are like that pre-design, that concept, that research work, like understanding, asking questions. What's the goals? What's the budget? What are the conditions of the thing that you're about to go do, right? And are there any regulations? Are there any like project scope or things like that? You're creating the scope, right? Then there's the like you start off with like some type of schematic design or sketching,
Mhm.
drawings, floor plans, layouts,
Yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
um, uh, what do you call them? Elevations, right? And so
Hmm.
you start exploring those different ideas, and from there you go to the design development stuff, and you look at those. You get more detailed plans, right? You're looking at your materials, functionality, what's the structural stuff, the electrical, the plumbing, that sort of thing. From there, you look at construction documents. That's the blueprinting and the permits and things like that, and understanding your materials, your systems, your safety, all that stuff. And from there, you bid, you get contractors, you get job foremen, you get the downstream help. Those are you're going to get bids for your construction stuff, right? Your plumber, your electricians, your carpenters, things
Contractors.
like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And then the
Mm-hmm.
process begins. You break ground, and then you start doing the final touches and the handover work. But everything, I don't care if it's software, I don't care if it's TV, I don't care if it's how your tennis shoes are made or how that light in your background of your picture was made. It all started and went through some process like that. And when I understood that, and I understood the way to make things was like an assembly line of creation and creativity, and it really was all about innovation and creativity more than it was about just adaptation and construction. Like the end result and the downstream part of the end part of that process is construction and manufacturing. But everything else is about, you know what I mean, figuring things out.
Mm-hmm.
It's knowledge work and
Mm-hmm.
what are we doing, and that kind of like creative jazz that we all do, that brings something to fruition. And when I understood that, that's when things started to really click. And I was just like, I can do anything.
Yeah, and this is amazing. So, from your perspective, this was great. You were connecting the dots, all these things were coming together. But how were you branding yourself externally? Because at the end of the day, you need a job, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And that's
So,
a great question, and I've
yeah.
talked about this before. So at many different, and this is really important too. I'm glad you asked that, because one of the most important things that I'm going to say as a disclaimer before I tell you how I did this is, in this industry, you have to be willing to pivot. You have to always be learning and have that kind of growth and learning mindset. You have to have the ability to know when something's kind of dying off or it's fizzling out, or maybe it's just fine, but it's dying off for you. Okay.
Mhm.
You need to know when things are transitioning. You need to be able to have that futures and foresight and understand, like, hey, I don't think we're going to be doing print media much more. So I'm not going to double down on learning Quark Express and PageMaker. You see what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
I smelled things cooking and changing before they happened, but I was always willing to pivot and change. And that brings me to what your question was. And so what that meant was, at every stage, I had different types of work. I had every advertising, marketing, branding, and positioning work. I had heavy web work. I had heavy software, like geeky industrial design. I did industrial design, like packaging, and created devices and like in 3D applications like Infinity
Mhm.
Studio and Maya. And I did all of this stuff. So you're right. I could have 4 or 5 different types of portfolios, and I did. And so, but online, when I started creating my online portfolio, um, I put a little bit of everything in there. And I realized that, that got me a lot of consulting and like contract design work. But you're right. When you want to go up for a job or you want to get employed for a large organization, you need to be a little bit more specific and strategic about what you show. And so
Yeah.
I did. And I had different sections of my website that showcased, like, hey, this is my writing and this is my video work, and hey, this is my animation. And that served me well for many years. But the more I grew and the more work that I did, the more I started to hone exactly what I wanted to do. And in the early 2000s, I heard the term service design, and I was already doing like complex mapping and, all different types of use flow diagrams, understanding systems and how different pieces of the system were getting their needs met or not met, refining services and understanding that everything, especially the customer experience and the employee experience, is usually the reason for good user experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
once I understood that sort of stuff and I understood the cause and effect and kind of that interplay of call and response work, like, you know what I mean? Like if this
Mm-hmm.
happens, then this happens over here.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Trigger actions and signals. Once I started understanding all of that stuff, it just my mind was blown and I was getting more excited. And Ali, if people that are searching for work right now and struggling with their career, if they're not super excited to get out of bed in the morning, like if you don't leap out of the bed doing cartwheels to get to work, and if you don't find yourself working for 12, 14 hours and going, damn, I haven't even had lunch today. I need to go eat. If you don't find yourself doing that stuff, then you're probably in the wrong career. I don't subscribe to a lot of this burnout culture talk. And the reason why I don't subscribe to it is because I feel like if you're getting burned out, it's the same thing as depression. And, if you're getting burned out, it's because you're trying to be something that you're not, or you're trying to do something
Mm-hmm.
that you're not good at, or that you really aren't fit for doing. And it's okay to say that our different experiences, our different mental models, and our genetics, our DNA all have a say in what it is that we're going to be good at. And if you start early understanding those things, you're going to do what you're best suited for. I can promise you that I would not be very good at replacing your transmission in your car. I would not be very good at quantum mechanics and understanding physics and how to shoot rockets into outer space. That's not going to be something that I would kick ass at, even if I learned. I could wrap my head around having to do calculus all day.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that I do and the things that I've chosen, I am very good at, and I've gotten very good at them, and to the point where like I have a very high success rate. But I never really wanted to write books or be on a stage, and I never really wanted to be, like an influencer and talk. I just wanted to work. And that's the thing that I feel like I see missing a lot these days is there aren't people that are just obsessed with the work, that are obsessed with, solving problems and obsessed with changing the world. You know what I mean? Through our choices and our design influence. And that's the kind of thing that kind of bums me out a little bit is you see people online a lot talking about their money, talking about, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
made so much money, or I did this, or I helped a little old lady across the street, or, they're like virtue signaling and they're talking about how rich they are. And it's like, man, if you're in this business to get rich or to talk about your money or your successes, I think you're probably in the wrong business. And I think a lot of people they go into different businesses, be that architecture, or, graphic design, or visual design, animation, service design, product, venture design, innovation. They go into these different things for different reasons. And I think we've seen a massive influx in the last 10 years of people who really probably should be doing something else that they're more
Mm-hmm.
passionate about and better at. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I think you've got a point there. So I would say I'd break it down into two different things. So one thing that you spoke about was this ultimate passion in what you do. You wake up every morning, you're like, okay, I'm excited, I want to do something. So I think there's always the second part of it that you mentioned, which is technically validation, or let's just call it a feedback loop needs to be created for people to carry on, right? And
Right.
for a lot of people, it's validation, social validation on, let's say, social media. They want to be admired, loved,
Right.
followed,
Right.
like for whatever they're doing, right? Which is fair enough, right? Like if they want to be, why not, right? So it's fair game. And so we're just playing this game of creating brands, right? So as you've created a brand. That's why I started off when I looked at your brand. I'm like, it's a very strong brand, and it's and I'm great. Like that's and that's what we're sort of opening up right now and discussing. I feel like as a designer, the passion itself comes from something that you start becoming good at, and it's not my idea. It's Cal Newport's idea, where it's like following your passion is bad advice. It's like just get good at stuff, and you will eventually get passionate about it, right? And again, I don't believe that's true as well. I believe in systems, and I believe in creating feedback loops.
Right.
Otherwise, you run out of energy, you run out of money, you run out of
Right.
so you need to sort of understand yourself, and as you said, what drives you. For me, a part of it has to be growth. So I always joke with people, because I worked as a contractor, so I've seen there are definitely two different distinct categories of work that I do. You either learn or you earn, and there are very few places where you can earn and learn at the same time. So, and the cycles are very short. So where you're earning, the cycle is small, because it's going to burn you out, because there's no learning there. 6 months and you're like, okay, no money is worth you staying in a place that is just killing your soul. It's that thing that doesn't
Right.
like drive you, right? Because we passionate individuals driven by this whole idea. You mentioned Joseph Campbell, A Hero's Journey. Like, we're there to do something, and we've got this role. We've got to, like, the call to action is waiting, and you just have to enter into the unknown world, and slay the beast. I love that. That's what I live for. Like, I think what you spoke about at the start, like, I can relate to it a lot. um, uh, Again, I think finding that sweet spot, I think, Thomas, is something which is really difficult, because somewhere down the line in a career like yours, career like mine, where we've just sort of pivoted a lot, like, it's difficult to then pivot into a slot which exists in the real world, right? So,
Right.
so, so I would love to know more, like, maybe your 2 cents on how to fit in, if fitting in is what you vouch for. I don't know.
It's different mental models, different people's backgrounds, and different types of people thrive in different places in different ways. And I think the best way to fit in for someone like me, because I'm low on the spectrum. I have ASD1, and a lot of people don't know it. Sometimes I stutter, and sometimes I get really obsessive and excited when I talk, and I sound really passionate, and that's when you can tell. But usually I can mask pretty well. But someone like me, um, I didn't need to fit in because I was never going to fit in. I needed to make my own way and make my own position and my own path. And I've spent the majority of my career contracting. And, people talk a lot about the work from home thing, and, you know what I mean? Returning to office and all this. I was working from home in 1995. You know what I mean? Like, I've been working from home for decades, and I was mastering that, before it was even the year 2000. And so I had screens, I had a big office, I had my router, for my dial up. I had all that. And so I just had to make my own way, and I think everybody has to figure out how they fit in the world, because some people are more innovative and some people are more adaptive. And innovators tend to like loose frameworks, and they like to find things on their own time, and they like to be creative, and they usually have messy offices. Like, you can't see the side of my office, but trust me, there's books piled everywhere, and papers and sketches all over the place of UI and everything. But the and adapters like rules, and they like frameworks, and they're more like the people that you said. They're like, work hard at something, put your 10,000 hours in, and you'll be good at it, and by then you'll be passionate. Well, I'm the exact opposite. I need to love what I'm doing, or I won't go do it. I'm one of those people that, like, I was when I played music, when I picked up an instrument, I only picked up an instrument to find the melody that was stuck in my head. I would pick up a bass or a guitar because I was trying to find the melody that was stuck in my head. I would never pick up an instrument to practice. I would never pick up
Hmm.
an instrument to practice my paradiddles or my scales and stuff like that. That just was not me. I'm also one of those kind of people where I can't go to a gym and jog in place and stare at someone else, and listening to the music and looking at people working out. If I ride a bicycle around the block, I enjoy that. If I walk around the block, I enjoy that because I'm catching in scenery, I'm taking in stimuli, and it's different for me. So I have to understand and like what I'm doing, or I won't do it. And so I paved my own way and made my own path. But like I said, I pivoted many times, I adjusted many times, and I wouldn't say that I ever had like a crazy fork in the road, but a lot of it was just like little adjustments where I was just like, I went over here or I went over there instead of going straight down the path that I was going. And I feel like that's been really helpful and have been very beneficial for me.
So, are you working full time now for another company, right? And you are a contractor, but as a contractor or as an employee?
I'm a contractor, full-time contractor for two different companies, and I have a side gig, and I also have a main gig where I work anywhere from 40 to 50 hours a week, and I have another one where I work 20, sometimes more than that. But yeah, so you mentioned like the getting paid or learning thing. I've done 50. I'm on my 55th startup right now. But let me tell, I'm not bragging. Let me tell you, let me tell you the truth about that. So, um, five of those companies of those 55, I was either some type of principal or I owned it, meaning, and they weren't small. The crappiest one made about 500K a year, and the best one made 7.5 million. And I had 14, and there was 14 people on the team, and we profited at about 76% profitability. We got an Inc. 500 2 years in a row. And there's a bunch of other like companies that little things that I did that were very profitable, but they fizzled out, or I hated the partner and had some kind of falling out with somebody, and I walked away from it. But those other, like, let's just say 45 to 50, they were specific things that I wanted to learn or understand about. So I offered myself up, and a lot of them wanted to give you equity, for free work. But what I said is, just give me a crappy hourly. Like, for instance, if my hourly at the time was $50 an hour, I would tell a specific type of startup that I saw because I wanted to do what they were doing, or learn what they were, into. Like, let's just say it was a music app or something that I was interested in. And I would say, look, I'll come work for you for $35, $40 an hour. You know what I mean? And I'm willing to devote 30 to 40 hours a week for you, but I don't want any equity in your app. And so a lot of people would say, hey, well, that's crazy. It's not crazy, because even back then, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I knew that most of the startups were going to fail. And I knew that they probably, got, some angel investing, or they got their first round or whatever. And they might have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, $20 million in the bank. But I knew eventually that money is going to dry up. And I also knew the people at the top were going to siphon off that money. But all I wanted was the experience. I wanted the experience, and I was hungry to learn. And this goes back to that. Hey, if you're not jumping out of bed and doing cartwheels in the morning to go do the work that you're doing, I don't care if you're making $5 an hour in a sweatshop or you're making $150 an hour. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. No amount of money is going to make you like something that you hate and that you're not good at and you're miserable about. And so people need to determine at a very early age who you are. You need to define who you are. What do you want? Are you great at mathematics? Are you great at storytelling? Are you an excellent writer? What is it that you're kind of naturally good at in high school? And if you don't know who you are or what you like and what you're decent at in high school, that's a bigger problem, because that means you haven't been nurtured, you haven't been cultivated. That means, and I didn't have a lot of parental supervision. Like, I'm not going to get into the heavy details of my childhood, but it was pretty dark. You know what I mean? And I had a lot of real violent men and crazy people around me, and people who were, committing a lot of crimes and getting in trouble. And I used to just leave my house and go hang out in the library because it was the safest place to be. And I learned how to, flip through card catalogs and microfiche, and I learned the Dewey Decimal System. And so by the time I was, 15 years old, I mean, I could be a librarian. And so guess what the first job was when I went to school was? I was a librarian, and I worked in a bookstore. And from there, I went and worked at Kinko's. I had 3 jobs at once, and I was working 50 hours a week and going to school full time. You know what I mean? So I would leave my house at 6 a.m. and come home by, 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. all day, every day for the first 2 years of my college. And I had to because I didn't have any money. You know what I mean? And I was working at a, I mean, I'm ashamed to say this, but I'll tell you because it's kind of funny. But I was working at a store, I was working at a small cafe, me and my friend. And man, if we didn't steal food from there, we wouldn't have eaten. We were hungry and we were always stealing food from there and stealing soap and stealing like things that we needed. And we just walk home with them. But, you know, all of that kind of segued nicely into design and how business works and, understanding, supply and demand and profit and loss and, how like organizational structures work and how division of labor works. I got all of that, in spades at a young age. So, I'm happy that I was able to make these pivots and I kind of understood who I was and the trajectory that I was kind of on at a young age, because had I not known that, I would have been even more aimless and more dangerous than, young men are today that don't have fathers in their lives and who are maybe drinking and doing drugs and they're failing to launch and they're sitting at home all day and they're like, they live with their mom and their a man is not in their life to show them any kind of, like guidance and isn't, being, showing them that kind of paternal love, you know what I mean? And teaching them how to do things and conduct themselves out in the world. And I feel like that's another thing just interpersonally that you're seeing a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. And those young men, if they're even working, are entering into the workforce. And you can tell when you interact with them that they don't have that upbringing and they don't really understand the consequences of some of their actions. And it's weird because I feel like teachers are having to deal with this too. A lot of teachers in the United States of America, especially, they're having to be babysitters. They're having to be like, they're basically just like wrangling juvenile delinquents. And they're overburdened, like classes that should have 25 kids in them have 50 kids in them. And so it's difficult, so the way to combat that is know who you are, have good starts. I hope to God your parents or one of your parents, someone, or you have some type of people who are influencing you and telling you, which way to go and, how to take care of yourself and how to be the best version of yourself. Because I had to discover all of that. You know what I mean? It took me some time, but I figured it out.
Yeah, you've done really well. I think it's made you into who you are right now, and I
Right.
think you've used that adversity that you faced at a younger age and made it into a superpower, where you have this power to sort of connect all these things together and then make something out of it. And that's where the awesome about section comes from. Now I know, like I'm just joining the dots, trying to live through your life. So I'm really curious to get your opinion on something, and this is one of those ideas that have been forming in my head recently, right? I somehow tend I'm beginning to believe that. So a little context here. So I believe that we have a lot of platforms now as designers, right? So and with platform, I would mean like job is a platform, entrepreneurship is a platform, content creation is a platform.
Right.
In that respect, right? And I feel like, from that perspective of having full-time employment to being self-employed and full-time employed, so it's like 50-50. I think it's going to be 40-60 very soon, where it's going to be 40% full-time or half-time and then 60% self-employment
Right.
going forward, because of how everything is evolving, because it's making us into employers. I don't know if you know what I mean. So this is the mindset that is sort of that I'm cultivating right now. So what's your opinion on that? Like,
Right. So the thing in the States is the gig economy. And what has happened is, especially over the last 10 years, more and more large organizations are sort of purging full-time employees because they don't want to pay for their health care. A large expenditure for every giant organization is healthcare. People get employment to get healthcare. Okay. It's just this weird, kind of system. But the bottom line is, um, if you can afford to get good healthcare elsewhere, I recommend contracting all day. And I have a unique situation in that my wife is in healthcare and works for a healthcare system. So we get our healthcare through her and I just pay for the healthcare, but it's a lot less expensive and I get way better healthcare than if I were to get healthcare at any one of my full-time gigs or anywhere else. So, what's happening is called the gig economy. And so a lot of us are contracting, a lot of us are doing consultant work and contracting and, freelance, all of that sort of thing. And there's varying degrees of it, but I thank God, once again, I was mastering this stuff 25 years ago and got good at, managing my accounts and my money and like how I do things. And the interesting thing about you being in real estate is my wife and I, we fix up houses and sell them. We flip houses. We sit on them for a while, usually, because that's how you get the most value out of it. But yeah, and when I do that, I draw up things and I share them with contractors and I function as the GC, as the general contractor, but I go hire the workers and I tell them what I want and how I want to do it. And we pick out all the, the stuff. Like I did this whole room, this was a 2-car garage and now it's a giant office. And so, I do a lot of stuff like that, like a lot of rehab, a lot of things like that. And we're constantly doing that. So, understanding how to balance a checkbook, understanding how to manage your time, understanding the different types of forms that you need to have and things that you need to get signed and how to write a good statement of work. You need to be able to do all of that to maintain good contract work. But yeah, I do believe exactly what you're saying, that we are going to do a lot more contract work and we're going to do a lot more gig work than working full time. And especially because a lot of these giant organizations, they're so convoluted and broken internally. Their data is not in order. Their management systems and operations are not in order. And so they have a really difficult time getting anything done. And that's why they hire consultants. That's why they hire McKinsey or BCG or Slalom or, any of these people to come in and start doing stuff. It's because they can't get it done themselves. And so what I find a lot when someone hires me or brings me on board is they're usually bringing me into a very broken and, crappy situation.
Yeah.
And they sugarcoat it on the front end, but the first month or two I'm in there, I sort of get a healthy dose of reality and I start to understand why things are breaking down and what's going on and why they're not able to get things done and get their needs met. So yeah.
That's great. Like, thank you so much for sharing your point of view on this. It's even like post gig would be really interesting to think about. It's like, you become a content creator, you have your own courses. I can imagine you're so fluent in what you talk about. You know so much. Maybe that is something that you should have on the side as well, because it's a natural progression of things, I would say, right? It's just this idea, like there is a small subset of people in the world who can draw more from your experiences and give them the option to do that, right? And charge little whatever for it. Yeah. So, but this is great. I can talk to you for hours. We need to put a stop to this because one last thing. Pac-Man arcade machine in the back. So the elephant in the room I wanted to address in the end. So is it working or?
Yeah, and it's got the original. It's got all the original games, all 65 of the original games on there. But yeah, my grandmother was really addicted to the original Atari system, and she loved Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man. She loved them. She would do her laundry and dishes and stuff like that, her housekeeping stuff, and then she would sit down and watch soap operas, and then for the rest of the day she played video games.
That's
My grandmother. And so I was never a huge Pac-Man fan. Actually, I liked, things like Defender and Galaga, and there's a game called 1943 that I like a lot. It's basically a Midway. It's about World War II and just airplanes and stuff. But I liked watching her play video games. I got a kick out of it, and it reminds me a lot of her, and so I bought it.
It's great. That looks amazing though, even as like a backdrop for a video call. This is awesome, right? I just love it.
Yeah, it works. I play it every now and then.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it was a delight, Ollie. Let's do it again. Take care of yourself.